This is the Bourboneering Podcast, a show where we discuss what's new in whiskey, the science behind our favorite brown spirit, and the ins and outs of tasting, all with people working hands-on in the industry. Let's get started. Hey y'all, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Austin. Today we'll talk about this month in whiskey, a review of the Heaven Hill Classic Budget Bottle and Bond JW Dant. But first, I want to lay down the groundwork on how I taste whiskey analytically versus how I drink it for fun. So without further ado, let's get started. So there's a few things I want to talk about in today's main topic. I want to first talk about how we drink whiskey versus how we prepare the drink. I look at that two different ways. You can taste whiskey analytically, or, get your tasting notes and all that fancy stuff. You can do that in any way, whether that's in a cocktail on the rocks or neat, which is classic. You don't have to just pour it in the neat Glencairn and do that whole tasting profile. You can do that with cocktails. In fact, I encourage you to do that with cocktails if you're into cocktails, because that really opens up your experience. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So there's two categories here: how we drink and how we prepare the drink. I'm going to start with how we prepare the drink. Now, I identified four main ways that we can drink whiskey. First, being the most common, is going to be in a cocktail or a mixed drink. So like an old fashioned is my go-to, my favorite, or like a whiskey and Coke. Everyone knows that. You go to the bar and they ask you what whiskey you want and what mixer you want. That's one way to do it, and that's probably the easiest way to get into the world of whiskey. Next, you have on the rocks. So that's just one big ice cube or multiple smaller ice cubes in a rock glass. Pour the whiskey on top. Great, easy. That really it starts diluting the whiskey, but it also cools it down. That makes it easier to taste. Not easier to taste. It makes it easier to not fight the alcohol burn. One, you have the dilution, but two, the coldness tamps it down. Think about it. I don't want to offend anybody. Why is the cheapest beer in the world advertised as being the coldest beer in the world? Because you don't taste it when it gets too cold. So that's kind of the rocks there. I love whiskey on the rocks, especially in the summer. Get a medium to high proof whiskey on the rocks. I love it. Don't get me wrong. But it's definitely, it kind of dampens the flavor and brings out the lighter floral notes in a whiskey. Then we have with just adding some water. Usually it's on the level of drops of water. But you can add as much water as you want. Maybe it's in the wintertime, you don't want to put it on a rock and make it cold, but you still want to kind of tamp it down, especially if it's a high proof whiskey. Water is great. I would suggest a high quality water. If you don't like your tap water, then don't use it. Use water that you like in your whiskey, but that's a great way to drink. And then finally, you have it neat or just sipping it straight. So you can either sip, enjoy it, or you can shoot it. Taking a shot of whiskey, we all do that every now and then, sometimes more than we want to. But those are both considered drinking it neat. So we're going to go into details on later episodes on how to get yourself into whiskey or get somebody you know into whiskey slowly. But in general, this is a good progression. Start them with cocktails or mixed drinks. Go from like a whiskey and Coke down to something that's more whiskey forward, like an old fashioned or Manhattan. Then switch them on the rocks so you get that dilution and the chilling. And then add some water, maybe not so many rocks, but a few drops of water. Even some seltzer water is great. That kind of goes back into the cocktail mixed drink area, but it's real fun. And then go in the neat, let them sip it. And we'll talk about how to do that without shooting it. But we'll get there. We'll get there in a second. That's kind of my progression of how I see we can prepare a whiskey drink. So the main event, how we actually drink it. So there's two ways to drink it. Don't think about it, just sit there and enjoy a drink. That's what I do 99% of the time. The only time that I don't do that is when I'm sitting here for a podcast and I'm doing a whiskey review or I'm having it for the first time. So what I do is pour a glass. Usually it's a rocks glass, or maybe a snifter type glass. We'll talk about glassware in a second, but a snifter type glass, but not necessarily a Glencairn, just something I can drink and not think about. Or I make an old fashioned. I have a whole old fashioned bar behind me. Eventually, I release a Patreon account. You can join that and see the video, but I got a old-fashioned bar behind me, basically. And that's usually best to use your daily drinker. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about something that's super expensive. Find one you like. My favorite daily drinker we're about to review here in a few minutes. That's your best. Don't think about it. Just enjoy it. Drink. But now let's talk about what I call analytical tasting, or tasting to experience a whiskey. This is what I do when I've never had a whiskey before. It's the first time I had it. Or I'm writing a kind of review on it. Or I'm sharing a review on this podcast. And there's 5 steps, I would say. And I use all 5 of my senses. Well, kind of 4, but you'll see. So that's kind of where I go with that. First step, audio. Use your ears. I like when I pull out a bottle, if it's a cork, listen to the cork pop. Listen to the sound of the whiskey pour into the glass. It's really not going to change much other than the bottle shape might change that glug sound. But that's nice. That's part of the experience. That's what I enjoy about whiskey. Get that full experience from auditory to taste, touch, smell. That's all part of it. So I don't necessarily judge a whiskey based on that, but it's a good start. It gets me in the mood for tasting some whiskey. Then the visual, again, another thing that I don't put a whole lot of credence into when I'm actually sitting down to review, but it's good to know. You look at the color of the whiskey you pour in the glass. You look at the legs. It's debatable on the legs mean anything on whiskey. It definitely does on wine, but whiskey, it's kind of debatable. Usually it can tell the viscosity of it, whether it's been chill filtered or not, but not as important. It's something to keep notes on. It's a pretty color. I wish I could paint or do some art. I would love that color in my artwork. But so next, you nose the whiskey. You have your whiskey in your glass, preferably a nosing glass like a Glencairn, but any glass will work. There's no wrong way. You want to smell the whiskey far away from enough from your nose to where it's not hurting. So what I like to do is bring the glass closer and closer until it gets a little uncomfortable to smell, and then I just back it away a little bit, and that's where you want to smell your whiskey. Depending on the proof, depending on a lot of things, your experience level, it may get closer or further. So you also want to smell with your mouth open. That allows the alcohol vapors to kind of pass through your nose, out your mouth. You get less intense alcohol burn that way on your nose. You actually get smells other than just ethanol. And you want to switch between nostrils. So usually you'll have a glass on one side or the other. Again, if you're on video, you can see this. You get different scents out of each nostril. Did you know that? That's something that it blew me away when I first learned about it. I go back and forth, write some notes based on that. And then I had to think, I don't necessarily just think of, oh, this smells like cinnamon. That comes with time, but what it really does, what does this remind me of? This reminds me of my grandma's house on Thanksgiving. This reminds me of making apple brandy, or making apple juice, making apple cider, things like that. And that's kind of where I get before I get to the tasting. So think of memories. Same thing with the taste. You'll see that in the taste here in a second. So finally, we're going to take a sip. We're going to take a taste. There's 2 main parts of the taste sense here. You get your palate and your finish. So what I like to do is take a small sip whiskey for the first sip, just like a hot cup of coffee. Take a small sip and just sip it. Don't do anything. Don't switch it around. Just sip it. What do you think? Get your palate acclimated. Next, take another small sip and then do what they call a Kentucky chew. So you're not swishing it like wine. Just kind of let it coat your tongue. Let it coat your palate. Where are you tasting what? Is sweetness coming on the front of the tongue, the back of the palate? The local rep from Maker's Mark gave a great presentation on this in our Louisiana Bourbon Fest a couple weeks back. Really taught me that we all have different areas of our mouths where we taste different things. So sweetness is not all in the same area for everybody. And that's something that really elevates. Once you know that, you can be on the lookout for those tasting notes. That really helped me out. And then finally, you're looking at the finish. So after you swallowed, What's that lingering flavor and sensation? How long does it last? Is it long, short, medium? Is it pleasant? Is it not? It's hard sometimes to get a actual tasting note out of this, but you know if it's a good aftertaste or a bad aftertaste, right? If it's a nice oaky, minty finish, I really enjoy that in a whiskey, especially a rye with that minty finish. Or is it something I don't enjoy in a rye, like a dill pickle note? Some people do. I hate it. That's what I'm looking for. And finally, touch. Now you're thinking, how are you using touch to taste whiskey? So I kind of cheated here, but I do like to take the last few drops of whiskey, dump it in my hand, and then you just rub and clap. Then you get a lot of tasting notes of the wood, the age, and then actually the base spirit. What did it smell like, taste like as White Dog? That's kind of a fun little way to do it. It's not necessary. It's one of those things I also don't take much into account when actually rating the whiskey, but it's a fun thing to really get to know the whiskey. Now, before I give a full rating to a whiskey or before I cast off something I don't like, I like to try it in all the ways that I mentioned up above. I will first try it neat. Hey, how does it actually taste? Then I'll try it with some water. I'll try it on a rock. I'll definitely try it in an old fashioned. I don't care how expensive it is. I will try a whiskey in an old fashioned, especially booze forward, delicious, well made old fashioned. It really highlights a good bourbon. I try it all like that, and I use this analytical tasting with all those methods. It really lets me understand a bottle of whiskey, and I've learned to enjoy certain whiskeys, even if they're maybe a budget bottle. And I've learned that I don't enjoy certain whiskeys, even though they may be really expensive. Last thing I want to touch on here, though, would be glassware. So I mentioned a snifter or a Glencairn glass. That's your tulip-shaped glass. That's your best glass for tasting neat. Really, it's for nosing. It's not going to change the taste much, but for nosing, it highlights those flavors into one area. I don't like drinking out of a Glencairn normally. I only drink out of Glencairns for tasting, for analytical tasting. The reason is a rocks glass, one, is easier, holds more whiskey, and it gives me a one-note flavor, but that's sometimes all I want. I don't want to have to think too hard sometimes when I'm just sitting back, relaxing, drinking. Of course, I use a rocks glass for old fashions. I have certain glassware for Manhattans, but really, if you have a rocks glass, you can do all this. Make any cocktail you want, pour it neat, taste it like we explained here. You don't need all sorts of fancy glasses. They're nice to have, and they really can elevate your experience, but they're not necessary. It's not going to be a barrier to entry for whiskey. Whiskey is great. You can buy a $15 bottle that's really good. In fact, we're going to taste one here today. And if you have the money, you can buy a $200, $300 bottle of whiskey. It's all up to you. All right, so that's our main topic. I want to move into our whiskey review. So today, as I mentioned, we're trying one of my favorite dollar for dollar whiskeys on the market. This is J.W. Dant. It is a bottle and bond whiskey, so that means 100 proof, and it's non-age stated, so it's at least 4 years old because it's bottle and bond and straight bourbon whiskey. Out of Kentucky, made by Heaven Hill, 100 proof. Real quick, bottle and bond whiskeys. I can do a whole episode on this, but just a basic rundown. It's a law, meaning that the whiskey must be at least 100 proof, at least 4 years old, and it needs to be made all in one distilling season. I'll go into more details later, but it's just kind of a sign of you know what you're getting. If it's a bottle and bond, you're at least getting a 4-year-old product at 100 proof. Great for cocktails. I like 100 proof point at my old fashioned. That's my golden range for an old fashioned. Anyway, let's review this J.W. Dant here, shall we? So the color, looking at it, it doesn't have many legs, but it's a nice raw honey color. Down here in Louisiana, we have dark raw honey, and that's kind of what I'm getting here. The nose is very classic bourbon. It's not super complex. It's not super layered, but I get corn and brown sugar. Corn, brown sugar, and a little bit of cinnamon. Great nose, if you ask me. Kind of light. but there's nothing, not overly powerful ethanol, nothing like that. Going to the taste, a note that somebody told me that I really like here is dirty corn. I get kind of corn grittiness, a little bit of ethanol in the taste, but there's a great brown sugar cinnamon sweetness. And it's just enough of proof punch that it shows up in an old fashioned, that it shows up neat. It can stand a rock or two. It is just a great, great taste. The finish, not super long, kind of weak, but the oak really stands out there. I don't get much oak on the nose or the taste, but the finish is where the oak stands out. That for-year age statement in Kentucky really powers through. Now the value, this is where this one shines. It's $21 here in Louisiana retail for a handle. That's a $175 for $21. It is fantastic price. I have 3 or 4 handles in my shelf, and I fill my decanter with it whenever it's empty. It's getting easier to find here in Louisiana, but it was kind of difficult to find for a while. For a while, it might have been Kentucky only for a bit, but it's spreading out. I give it a 4.5 out of 5 on value. I didn't score each the other areas individually, but overall, I give it 4 barrels out of 5, and that value is really what kicks it up a notch. It really stands up to me to a $40, $50, $60 bottle of bourbon. So it's my review on JW Dant Bottle and Bond. Again, that is my daily drinker. That's my daily driver. That's my go-to. I make old fashions with it. I drink it neat like I am right now. Even on a hot summer day, I'll just throw a little bit of seltzer and a few rocks, and I'm good to go. And this brings us to our final segment, This Month in Whiskey. If you follow me on TikTok at Bourboneering or on YouTube at Bourboneering, I post 60 seconds this week in whiskey every week. Just top headlines that I found this past week in whiskey. So this is kind of our more in-depth. I take those stories that I found this throughout the whole month and go into a little more detail here. First one that I mentioned was Conor McGregor was slapped with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Basically, his close friend and fellow boxer, Artem Lobov, I could be mispronouncing that, and I apologize. He is Russian. He's a close friend of McGregor's. He's suing for royalties owed from the sale of the Proper 12 whiskey. So Proper 12 was sold, and McGregor sold his shares of Proper 12 for $600 million last year in 2021. And Lobov claims that he's owed royalties based on that sale, up to 5%. And he claims that, and I quote from an article from Yahoo News, he was instrumental not only in helping McGregor develop the brand, but also in the decision to choose whiskey over a vodka venture, which is interesting to me. Lobov being Russian, you would think he would be pushing for the vodka venture. McGregor being Irish, I think, I'm pretty sure. Obviously, with the Irish whiskey, I thought he would have jumped on whiskey in a heartbeat, but maybe not. Proper 12 is an Irish whiskey, of course. It's one of the, I would say one of the first popular celebrity-owned / celebrity endorsed whiskeys. And that's actually kind of a trend going on here in a second, but it's not great in my opinion. I'll give a review on it later, but it's not really great. It's got the name and that's about it. But obviously it's worth some money. He sold it for $600 million. I don't know the truth behind Lobov's claims, but if he's owed that, 5% of $600 million is a lot of money. So hopefully that gets figured out. That's something I'll be watching closely. Next, more on the fun side, Jack Daniel's announces its distillery series number 10. These are little 375 distillery only bottles. This is obviously the 10th in the lineup and is straight Tennessee whiskey finished in pecan wood chips. That's basically Jack Daniel's at 120 proof that they are adding pecan wood chips to add that pecan wood flavoring. I don't know if I've never had a pecan wood finished whiskey, so that could be interesting. I like different finishes. I like wood finishes. I'm glad Jack Daniel's is stepping outside the box, doing more than just their basic black label and their basic Even their single barrel program, which is fantastic and delicious, is just Jack Daniels at a higher proof. So I'm glad they're stepping outside the box here, doing something different. Good for them. And I also wanted to mention the trend of celebrity branded whiskeys continuing. I read one that Hemingway inspired this whiskey brand, and then also a popular gambler. I'm drawing a blank on his name now. I've never heard of him, but he started a whiskey brand, and I think we're kind of getting stretched thin on these celebrity whiskeys. Like I said, Proper 12 was one of the first ones that I remember. You also have the Mesquite finished Wild Turkey with Matthew McConaughey. And then we have Brothers Bond, which is the Vampire Diaries guys. The Mannings created a whiskey. It's getting ridiculous to me. Some of them are good, some of them are not. That's not really the point. It's just selling a name, and I'm over it. That's my little bit of my opinion, but I'm over that. Anyway, and ending on a high note, of course, Screwball, everyone's favorite peanut butter whiskey, it just announced that they're releasing a peanut butter eggnog. So I'm definitely going to be trying that out for sure. That's all I got today, y'all. I really appreciate y'all listening. Let me know if you have any thoughts. Please reach out to me at Bourboneering on Instagram or bourboneering@gmail.com. I'm happy to connect and respond. Rate and review if you're on a podcast player, and then like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. I think that's all I got. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the show. If you want more Bourboneering, I post weekly 60-second whiskey news updates on YouTube and TikTok. I also have a long backlog of old videos on YouTube. Check those out. If you want to get in contact with me, email me at bourboneering@gmail.com or connect with me on Instagram at Bourboneering. Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.